And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Technology for Good show. This is episode 61. And today I have a new co-host with me. Keith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. My name is Keith Bohanna. I work in Ireland with a consultancy called Near Future, and we help clients, businesses, and organizations work through processes of digital transformation. I've known Tom for many, many years, and you way back when in his previous business, he ran a data center in Cork, and before that was a software developer. So it's great to catch up with him today.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks. And I'll introduce myself quickly. Tom Raftery. I work for an industry analyst firm called Redmonk, and I concentrate on clean tech and energy efficiency solutions. And in this show, the Tech for Good show, which is every Friday, we showcase technologies that help people live better lives thanks to technology, I guess, it's very broad. And we touch on lots of different areas. And typically, we start off the show setting a bit of context by talking about some climate-related stuff before heading into the technology stuff proper. So this week being no different, the first story that I saw that I thought was interesting was this one, talking about how Angela Merkel is after persuading the G7 companies to pledge to get rid of fossil fuels entirely, 100% by the year 2100. It sounds like a long way out. It is a long way out. It's 80 something years from now, but in the case of some of them, getting them to actually commit to fully getting out of fossil fuels was in itself a bit of a coup. Some of the countries that are in there will be fossil fuel free before 2100. So I think just getting them to commit was a good thing in and of itself. And I think between now and then, they'll redraw the boundaries and bring that date closer. But just getting them to actually admit to a date or commit to a date, I think was a good thing. Keith, what are your thoughts on this?
We might be playing good cop, bad cop here. Is it remotely possible, Tom, that by the year 2100, broadly speaking, we'll have run out of fossil fuels?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite.
No.
No. We're going the other direction, unfortunately.
We keep finding them.
We keep finding them. We do. We keep, discovering new technologies like fracking to make sure that we can get them, and tar sands oil extraction techniques to make sure that we can get them from the dirtiest possible places. And of course, now that we're getting rid of all the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, we can go exploring there too.
That is a really good enabler, isn't it? Getting rid of hundreds of feet of really, really, really cold ice. Okay, having put that to one side, then this is potentially a good thing. I guess, as with you, going back, watching this debate for the last 15 or 20 years, and way back when I was lived in England and Wales, I was involved in Folk Cymru or Friends of the Earth campaigning. Watching politicians move on stuff like this is like watching a slow-moving glacier, and you can never, ever be sure.
I've seen continents drift faster.
Yeah, you can never be sure whether they're running through a positioning piece or actually genuinely pledging. And on top of which, because they run in 3 to 5 year election cycles, what they pledge is quite often overturned by a subsequent government with a different point of view. So it's really, really difficult to be optimistic. And I'm looking down through the story here. When the environmental advisor to Shell, Unilever, and Rio Tinto says that Merkel's made a big play, you can almost immediately cynically guess that she hasn't. because Shell are in favor. If Shell are in favor, there's a massive question mark over this.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. That's
what you want to hear of you.
Oh my god, that's terribly cynical.
Hear them squealing and screaming in the corner.
Like
at that point, you've hit a sore spot.
Yeah, that's a fair point, but you will never find politicians doing that to fossil fuel companies, unfortunately. It's just not going to happen. No, well, there's no money in that. Different from votes. They don't care about votes per se. They buy the votes by getting the money. They need the money to buy the votes.
Can't believe we're saying this.
We're terribly
Sorry,
cynical.
you're saying this. I just want to be clear about this.
But no, Merkel herself has always been pretty strong on the environment and climate. So the difficulty she has is dragging everyone along with her, and with the situation in the economy for the last 5 years, she's had other priorities. But it looks now like she's reprioritizing climate, which is a good thing for everyone, because she's
this is a series of baby steps, and it's either baby steps forward or backwards, and there is enough bad news in this space. So yeah, absolutely, let's take it as a good news story.
Yeah, exactly. And we normally actually start off this show with bad news stories, so I thought it was a nice change to have a good news story. So we're normally talking about the reduction in ice, or more storms or whatever. The first story this week is a good news story. We've got the G7 to agree to get rid of fossil fuels by 2100. Awesome.
Excellent. Absolutely. Big thumbs up.
So we'll move on. The next story that I thought was interesting was this one. And this has been a bit of a bugbear for me for quite a while. The fact that Amazon are not reporting their fossil fuel, their carbon footprint, essentially. And they've been, we talk about radical transparency, but for the last decade or so, Amazon have been chasing down this policy of radical opaqueness. They've not reported on anything, never mind their carbon footprint. And Karine Tillotson, by the way, has just come on the Tech for Good hashtag and said hi. So hey, Karine, good to know you're following us here.
Hi.
So this story talks about how Netflix has been putting pressure on Amazon, because they're a large Amazon customer, to actually start Amazon to go down the road of renewables. And it's not just Netflix, but they being one of the big or bigger Amazon customers. It talks to how customers can actually change the suppliers' modus operandi by putting pressure on them. And it's not just Netflix. There are 19 other AWS customers that have put pressure on Amazon. And now the goal is to raise Amazon's percentage to 40% at least by the end of 2016. So they still have a long way to go. They say 40%. They're not outlining where that 40% is coming from, and they're very, very opaque still. They have said that they have a long-term vision of going to 100% renewable, but they've never said by when or how. So, color me cynical. And we've already had that discussion.
I'm a good cop now.
Go for it, good cop. Off you go.
This is fascinating. I love seeing, as we were talking about before we came on air, for many, many years, I've been really, really interested in the whole idea of active consumerism. Yep. Large corporations, companies get their power through the money that they receive from their turnover, which is people spending with them. And in the case of consumers, that's the individual spends that the decisions that you take on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And in this case, it's the larger spend decisions that individual companies, corporations are making. And it's really, really interesting to see that large spend being leveraged in this way to force compliance with a core ethical, ideological issue upwards into their supply chain. So fair play to Netflix.
Yeah,
it's really strong.
It is. It's great. It's great. It's great to see. And it's these kinds of actions that and we'll be talking a little bit more about that when we get to the Ariba story later on in the show. But it has been fantastic to see this happen. And it's the kind of thing that I've been pushing for a long time. If you follow the Green Monk blog, every so often I'll give Amazon crap and I'll pressure some of Amazon's customers like Infor and people like that. And they haven't done anything about it, but it's good to see people like Netflix, jumping in there and doing something. And Karen Tillotson on Twitter, they're laughing at my "color me cynical" jibe, and Tammy Paulus is on Twitter as well, saying she's watching us as well, and she's enjoying the conversation around Amazon's reporting of the carbon footprint. So good stuff. We have a bit of an audience anyway today, so that's nice to see.
It is, and I suppose the other part of this mix, because part of their strength does come from their shareholders, is wondering where the larger funds and individual shareholders in Amazon are sitting on this. Obviously, they don't care a whole lot, or they would have forced reporting.
Well, this is an interesting side of it. Yeah, you're absolutely right, because we're seeing in a lot of large companies who are publicly traded, we're seeing investors, and often institutional investors, putting pressure on the board to go down the renewables track. That doesn't seem to be happening in Amazon for some reason, or if it is, they just don't give a crap and they just ignore any pressure. But I haven't come across I haven't heard of much pressure on them to do the right thing.
Unless their shareholdings are so widely dispersed that no one has individually got enough of a percentage to put.
It's possibly something like that, because it's often the institutional investors, or someone like Ceres who are ethical investors who jump in and do that. I'm not sure why it hasn't happened. Maybe there's a couple of large investors in Amazon who are internal, who just don't give a crap.
Yeah, I'd say that. I actually was about to start looking at Amazon shareholding, but that might be a little bit of a diversion.
Yeah. We'll move on. So we'll look at the lighting space now, and Dyson, James Dyson, the inventor, apparently has passed a couple of genes on to his son Jake Dyson, and he's come up with a new LED light. Now, this is interesting only because LED lights are obviously far more efficient than CFL or incandescent lighting. So from that perspective, this is interesting. But what this guy Jake Dyson has done with this light is a desktop light, and there's a taller version which can stand over the shoulder kind of thing. What he's done is he's made LED lights, which are already quite efficient, even more efficient. And he's made them more efficient not in that you get more light per watt, but rather he's increased the lifespan of the light. So typical LED lights will last, somewhere between 10 and 20 years. And the one he's come up with is going to last around 37 years. So he's almost doubled the lifespan of the light, and the way he's done it is by building in cooling essentially into the lighting structure. What you've got is a heat sink built in. This black area here on the light is where the LED lights are, and then you've got a heat sink going back along the arm here. And there's a nice video on this at the bottom of the article, where you can look and see all the innovations that he's built into this light. The light has got a pulley on the back, which allows it to slide up and down, and has got these bearings here, which allow it to slide in and out, and it can turn through a full 360 degrees as well. So it's quite a nicely designed light. The key, what's the word I'm looking for? The killer app, if you want, of the light is the fact that it lasts twice as long as any other LED light. So having said that, it's not cheap either.
I can't begin to imagine. So a couple of thoughts on that, I guess. One is that in an unfortunate era when product innovation continues the pace, it's really interesting to see someone committing to a bulb that lasts 37 years. If you did that 37 years ago, you'd skip a substantial number of of opportunities across generations of upgrades of lighting to actually reduce your environmental impact on the back of a single purchase. That's kind of fascinating. The other bit's nothing to do with this, which is a little bit of I always have this puzzling thing with the Dysons. James in particular, James's biography is fascinating. One of the few biographies I've ever read, and his capacity to innovate and imagine and reimagine an event is incredible. Yeah. And what he does with it is produces hand dryers. and given what he has to say, and vacuum cleaners, and given what he has to say about the state of the world, you would always have imagined that he would have tilted towards things that actually solve the world's problems. I know it all peripherally does, sort of, because it's a little bit more efficient, but broadly speaking, he'll have left this wonderful world of ours having achieved slightly better hand dryers and vacuum cleaners. And it seems like such a waste of talent. And I'm speaking to someone who would in the late 80s, early 90s in England have seen the ads for his original wheelbarrow. So, you know, go back a long way with him. Wow. He produced a wheelbarrow with instead of the tire that gets stuck in mud, was a full globe. So it would bounce. Yes. It would bounce through it. Do you remember that?
Yes, so I do. I didn't realize it was him.
Yeah, and very few people do. That was his very first product.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's always struck me that this is all kind of scratching the surface of something that doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, I mean, if he got into solar or wind or something and invented a new wind turbine or something, because he's into airflow.
Yeah, so go out to the developing world. I've met so many people, and I'm sure as you, entrepreneurs with no resources and limited capacity to achieve scale, who spend a lot of time rethinking some of the basics around how people in developing worlds are going to slowly match our standards of living without replicating the same mistakes that we have done. And that's the answers to that are not really going to come through 37-year LEDs, not really, or hand dryers, you know.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, they do need decent low energy lighting solutions, but not at the price point that he's coming out with them at.
Yeah, it's hard to see how that's a solution to anything.
Yeah, no, these are very much first world solutions, and Karine Tillotson is chiming in there on the hashtag Tech for Good, saying if I bought the LED light bulbs that have a 37-year lifespan, I would never need to buy more in my lifetime. So that's another viewpoint on them as well.
Absolutely.
Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, Karine doesn't particularly say. I guess if you're happy with them for 37 years, you know, excellent.
It would be good, yeah, good to buy something and park it for the guts of 4 decades, wouldn't it? Just ignore it.
Yeah, I mean, and actually that's an interesting point, because I was in a meeting where there was a representative of Porsche speaking on sustainability, and Porsche is a company you wouldn't normally associate with sustainability. And I've forgotten her name, but she made a very interesting point. And she said 75% of every single Porsche, or 75% of all the Porsches that were ever manufactured, are still on the road.
Wow.
And when you start thinking about resource utilization, and you think that 75% of how many Fords that have ever been manufactured are still on the road, or Toyotas, or Hyundais, or Nissans, it's a lot lower than 75%. How much resources have gone into the generation of those versus Porsche?
And then it unfortunately does bring you into the old-fashioned way of making things, and the handmade, hand-tooled, handcrafted, no one can afford them space, you know. And there's the never-ending debate.
Yeah. No, it's a tough circle to square, or square to circle.
Yeah, I bought a $14,000 handmade watch so that my great-great-grandson can wear it. That's more sustainable than a $99 Swatch watch. Yeah, maybe so. That's nice for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The answer is I don't know,
Yeah,
in all these things. It really is. It really is.
there's
We'll keep going.
absolutely.
So we're going to transportation. And Tesla came out a few weeks ago.
Or not in this case.
Well, yes, true, 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 true. Tesla is a transportation company, kind of. Actually, it's more an energy company. So maybe we're in the
Yeah.
energy space now, not the transportation space. And Tesla came out with their Powerwall battery. And it's one that you could have in the home on your wall, store energy in it, take in energy at off-peak times. Maybe you're generating your own energy from solar panels or a small turbine. Store it in the battery and then use it at full peak times. So a nice little idea. And then what they've said now is that their $4,000 battery, they're going to double the size of it. So they're bringing it up from the original 2 kilowatt hours. They're bringing it up to 5 kilowatt hours, which is slightly more than doubling it. But we're doubling the headline, and we're actually in the story getting down to the real situation. And on top of that, there's this secondary story coming out of Mercedes-Benz, saying that they are now also going to start producing batteries. The batteries they're producing will be similarly, they're 2.5 kilowatt hours. So this announcement came out around the same time as the Tesla one. So they got kind of shortchanged there, not seeing the Tesla had upgraded to 5 kilowatt hours, and they're coming in. So I think Mercedes are going to have to go back to the drawing board. But it's interesting because it speaks, I think, to a shifting to people now starting to think about having storage in home, which they might not have done before. There have always been the ability to buy batteries for in-home storage. People like Siemens and ABB and people like that were selling systems that would allow you to do that for a long time, mostly to commercial and industrial customers, but they had smaller ones that would work in the home situation as well. And a lot of the solar installers, had an option to do this as well. It wasn't cheap. But that option was there. Now with Tesla and subsequently Mercedes coming into the market, the economies of scale are kicking in. The prices are coming down. The efficiencies are going up. And it's going to be something that I think will be more commonplace.
So I'm just watching Dermot Casey. My colleague in Near Future is talking about his 16-year-old Toyota still on the road.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Cheaper than a Porsche. He's saying that's that's a good point. and in my own case, I'm driving a Prius, and it was bought in 2008, so it's not quite 16 years, but it's a Toyota as well. But I've no plans to change it. It's doing fine, and if it keeps going for another 7 years, I'm well happy. So long may these things last.
You can tweet Dermot back in 6 or 7 years. On the Tesla story, I'm fascinated by this. I don't understand the specifics of the technology that's going on. What I'm really, really interested in is whether over the next couple of years we're going to see a hockey stick sized change in how energy is delivered and stored in homes. And by hockey stick, obviously, I mean that we have this very, very, very gradual movement over the last couple of years to the point where it doesn't make any substantial difference. But at some point, we might actually see this kind of growth. And it looks like we're starting to see the consumerization of some of the building blocks of being able to manage your own energy supply.
Yeah, I think so, and I think one of the things that you gotta remember is that the price of solar has been coming down at an exponential rate, literally at an exponential rate for the last 30 years. I have a graph of it here. I'll see if I can call it up, and. When you see that, it's It's fascinating for a number of reasons. It's fascinating because it's been coming down at an exponential rate for so long, but it's also fascinating because when you look beyond the actual graph, and I'm calling it up on screen here. Just give me a second here to get that on screen, and I'll share that now. And have a look at this. This is mind blowing, because this is what's called the Swanson effect. It's the price of photovoltaic in dollars per watt.
Wow.
So it takes into account not just price, but also efficiency. And what you gotta really take into account there is the graph stops at 2013, but the source is Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is a very reliable source. And if you look at the years 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 13, that curve is continuing.
Yeah.
We're now in 2015. I've not heard anywhere that curve has leveled off. And there is no reason to think that it will level off in the next 5 years. Why would it? So if it's not leveling off, it's keeping on that exponential downward curve. And if it keeps going down that way, we're going to get to a point where solar energy is far cheaper than any other source of energy. It's going down faster than Moore's law. It's going to have enormous implications for energy production globally. So
in the same way that we're seeing with a number of our clients, that digital has moved from slowly transforming into a substantial reworking of the fundamentals of their entire business and the value proposition. What we're going to see over the next decade or so is both energy transmission and energy generation companies having to completely rework how they operate.
You'll find that it becomes negligible in cost to add solar into windows, into roof tiles, into bricks on the outside of buildings. Energy production via solar, because just looking at that chart, it's going to keep going down. I mean, it's been coming down for 30 years, and why would it stop tomorrow?
And so eventually, and obviously there's a massive retrospective build happen. The grid is almost going to exist as a backup for emergencies and as a way of just redistribution of energy surplus.
Potentially, exactly. It'll depend from geography to geography, and it'll depend on regulations as well. I mean, one of the things I posted about on Facebook this week was the fact that there are regulations in Spain right now which penalize people for storage of energy. It's insane. If you've got your own generation and your own storage, you get taxed on it.
I saw that. It made one of those headlines that you just look at, and if you showed it to a 5 or 6 year olds, they just look at you and say, "That's stupid." Yeah,
exactly. It's insane.
It's obviously stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because of the lobbying influence of the large generators in Spain. They own the political parties. They own the major right-wing party, the Partido Popular. So, they write the laws, the Partido Popular just stamps them, and off it goes. They want to be the only ones who can generate and earn money from so doing. But, that's all that is going to be disrupted even more so as solar continues to fall in price. And we're going to see, we're going to see things like community generation happening. What we're going to see is, as well, things like the utility companies having to reinvent themselves as grid management companies, as managers and distributors of distributed generation, as ways of leveling and maintaining an even flow of energy through the system.
Yeah, from different sources at different times.
Yeah. They're no longer the generators.
Yeah,
they're the distributors now. So that's the direction we're headed. And when you see things like this, you start to become more optimistic about the future, because when you look at the carbon footprint of the world, almost 70% of it, well, what are the numbers? Electricity generation accounts for an enormous amount of it. I've forgotten the exact numbers. I have them on a slide somewhere. But when you take into account, electricity generation and transportation, you're looking at 70% of the carbon footprint of the world right there, just from those two. And
Wow.
if you move transportation to being more coming from electricity, the two of them together, then you've got a massive lever at 70%. So if you can electrify transportation, we're doing really, really well. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's
more good news.
Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous.
You're happy you came on the show. You're feeling a lot more optimistic.
I might be starting to feel inadequate now, because we're going to be looking at a wonderfully designed scooter.
Yes, exactly. The next one is the scooter, and this is the Gogoro. That's how I'm going to pronounce it anyway. And this is fascinating, because I can see pluses and minuses to this. It's an electric scooter, and it's a really cool one, and there's a nice video here on it as well. And the links, by the way, the links to all these stories are in the show notes. So do feel free to go to the show notes, and you can see there that I've copied and pasted the links in there. But going back to the scooter, the scooter is this gorgeous little scooter, which has two batteries, which look like this. It has two batteries under the seat to power it, and you can see the two batteries there. You lift up the seat, and you see the two batteries there, and there's room for a helmet there as well under the seat. I mean, there are a lot of electric scooters out there. What makes this one a little different? Well, first of all, it's got the two batteries, which means it has a range of about 60 miles. So, nearly 100 kilometers. It's beautifully designed. You've got this nice steel work throughout. You've got a very digitized dash on it as well. It syncs up with smartphone applications, and you've got lovely little photographs here as well. So it's all very digital, all very nice, all very highly designed, lots of different color options in it. But what the manufacturers are doing is they're talking up the whole battery technology as being a big part of it, saying, look, these batteries can be used not just for driving the bike, but you can take them out and use them to drive other stuff as well. And basically, the batteries for them is what they're citing as being the big innovation on this, because you've got these battery stations that you go to when you're running low on battery. You take your batteries out of your scooter, you put them into this battery bank, and they pop out two new batteries for you from there, and you stick them into your bike and drive off again. The batteries are all individually coded, so that when you arrive and you put your two depleted batteries in, it now knows the two batteries that come out are yours and in your bike. So if your bike is ever stolen, if anyone takes those batteries and puts them into one of these machines, which they have to do if they want to drive it, they now know where your bike is. So, you've got some security stuff built into it as well. It's identifiable, trackable, all this kind of thing. So it's a very neat system. For me, I like it a lot, but I also see that one of the big advantages of it is also slightly disadvantageous, in that if you are limited to using only their batteries, that you can only get charged from one of their battery stations, it means you can't go home in the evening and plug it into the wall. And if you can't plug it into the wall, that's a serious, I see that as a serious disadvantage to the bike. I mean, for everything else, I'm on board with everything else they're doing, but having to go to one of their battery stations to do a recharge, they're going to have to blanket the place with their battery stations, is the bottom line.
I'm looking through the article to see if there's a reference to home charging. So you would have assumed you lug both of those batteries in and plug them into a home charger, but you don't.
Nope. Can't do it.
So so either that's coming later on, or it's a very deliberate business decision.
It's a deliberate business decision. It is.
Wow, that's odd. On the plus side, this is a really substantial demonstration of the Internet of Things. The intelligence that is connecting a variety of devices here across the central network is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the spread out.
Very cute.
Yeah.
The tech behind it is really cool. The whole thing, as I say, the one niggle I have with it is that you can't charge them at home, and I can see why. I can see it makes absolute sense for them from a business perspective to do it that way, and that's what they've gone and done.
And yet, if they're talking about the batteries being used for other things, they must have a system in place where they're going to make available the I guess they may be licensing out the ability to tap into those batteries, but quite why someone else would build out a third-party device with the absolute dependency on these guys or girls staying in business doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's a number of things about this that don't make sense. It's interesting, isn't it?
Maybe it's just lack of information on our side.
It could well be, or whoever set it up has got enough money that they don't have to actually think it through.
They've taken in institutional money, so I'd say it's been pretty well thought through. All right, so we'll see.
And actually, there's another piece here which I've got to put my hands up to. This is based in Asia, and the dynamics of how business modeling and chunks of society work in Asia is fundamentally different, to my understanding.
It's very different. It's quite different to here. Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah,
that's a good point. We'll keep on in the transportation sector, because Siemens have developed an electric motor for aircraft, which is significantly more efficient than anything that has come before. And I mean, we're in the middle at the moment of seeing electric aircraft with the solar impulse plane flying around the world, completely powered from solar. So we're in the middle of seeing that. So now having Siemens develop this electric motor, which is far more efficient. It weighs 50 kilos, the motor, and it delivers a continuous output of 260 kilowatts, which opens up the possibility of larger aircraft with takeoff weight of up to 2 tons and a capacity for 100 passengers using an electric propulsion system. So it's really interesting. They're in talks to develop an aircraft with Airbus for 100 passengers with an electric motor for delivery in 2035. So this isn't something that's going to happen today or tomorrow, but aircraft are one of the holdout forms of transportation in terms of fossil fuels. And it's very hard to get around flying, to get somewhere. There are very few decent alternatives. If I have to go to the US, the most efficient way for me to get to the US is on a plane, and it's not very damn efficient from a carbon perspective.
Most time efficient way for you to get to the US?
No, the most carbon efficient way as well for now.
Because
most when you look at most of the large ocean going liners as well, they burn stuff which is just nasty. It's nasty. The any of the freighters or ocean liners, there's no standards in place for those around what they burn. So the stuff they burn it makes tar sands oil look clean.
So the ocean pollution impact is horrendous.
It is. It is.
Okay.
It is. So, and even if it wasn't, the amount of fuel that a plane burns flying from here to there versus the ocean liner, you're better off on a plane. So.
And as you were saying earlier, one of the impacts of this is to push power generation back to central, which is potentially where large decisions can be taken to have really large impacts on carbon emission.
Exactly. If you can get transportation to be electric, and then you're getting your electricity delivered from renewables, it's a win-win-win-win. It's good for everyone. So when we were having that discussion earlier, we were talking about cars and the whole tailpipe issue. So you've got the emissions at the tailpipe generated by the internal combustion engine. But if you shift that, if you take that internal combustion engine and make it an electric engine, then the impact or the carbon issue is shifted from the tailpipe back to the central generation facility. So you've got efficiencies there because you've got less losses you would expect. If economies of scale, if you're generating a large generation facility versus lots of different cars, it's more efficient to have it in one facility. And then if that one facility is renewable as opposed to coal, for example, it's more you've got far less carbon implications right there. So yeah,
and that's the end game there. That one.
Exactly. We'll keep going and sticking slightly with transportation, where we're talking about Google Maps. And so Google Maps now allows you, and this is trivial, desktop to your iPhone. So basically you're on your desktop, you get your directions, and now you can send those directions to your iPhone. And I presume this is something that was on Android before. I don't know. I have an iPhone myself.
I'm in the same boat.
It's something that I get frustrated with regularly. I'm going to go somewhere. I call up the directions on the desktop, and then I have to do it again on the iPhone. So the ability to just do it once and just send it to the iPhone. Looking forward to that. Gotta say. But go on.
There are so many minor iterations of changes like this that will take us from where we are now to a completely different world where everything becomes seamless, and those interactions between devices will become something you don't think about. Everything now is not. We're nowhere close to intuitive.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, we had this big Apple event this week, the developer conference, and they had a number of announcements. I'm not going to go through most of those, but one of the ones that came out of that was improvements to their Apple Maps service. So we talked a second about Google Maps, now we have Apple Maps. And they've talked about having Apple vehicles on the road in Ireland and the UK, and not just in Ireland and the UK, and the US as well, so that they're trying to catch up with Google on their street maps. They have a long way to go on that because Google have been doing the street map thing since 2006. So they have 9 years at least to catch up on, but at least they're starting to do it, which is good. It gives Google a bit of a, less of a feeling of complacency, I guess. And the other interesting thing, I mean, there was a couple of interesting things that came out of the developer conference, the Apple Developer Conference. One of them was that their developer program, which is $99 per annum, or I think it's 89 euros on our side of the pond, it allows access to iOS, OS 10, and Watch OS tools for now $99. Previously, you had to pay $99 if you wanted iOS, $99 if you wanted OS 10, and the Watch OS wasn't available. So now you get the 3 in the one subscription. So for anyone who's into developing for the Apple ecosystem, suddenly the price of access to this has come way down. So now with the $199, you can start developing tools for either the Watch and or iOS and or OS 10. And of course, when you look at, I mean, there's a slew of resources out there for anyone who wants to develop for these platforms, free, available. I mean, you just go to YouTube or go to any of the code sites, GitHub or any of these ones. There's a slew of resources available out there. So suddenly getting cheaper access means it's easier for developers to get in and start developing no matter where they're based. and suddenly they get access to people who have these devices, and you know, they get 70% of the price of the sale price on the App Store. So the ability to actually start making money from this $99, you know, becomes easier to get to.
And I'm sitting here sadly thinking about this from a slightly different perspective, and fully accepting everything you say, which is, why did it take them so long to get to this? I'm sitting here looking at it thinking, it's either a business decision that they're going to lose $99, and it's not that. So it's actually, in a company of 50,000 people, it's finding the resources to integrate the accounts at the back end and relaunch it as a single membership. Yeah, never ceases to fascinate me how long it takes very large businesses to get around to doing really simple things.
You know, I would take it even further, Keith, because no, I would say, why are they charging people for access at all? You know, why not charge them 99 cents if you need to charge them something? Charge them 99 cents, which is something anyone can pay. And suddenly, I mean, basically, the developers for Apple are a source of revenue. And if you forget the $99, right? Forget that completely.
Yeah, it's an irrelevancy. Yeah.
Yeah, the developers are developing apps which are being sold on the site, either for iOS or for OS X or for watchOS. You know, why put this $99 barrier in place at all? Because it's a barrier for people, for some people to get in. For others, it's, you know, just, yeah, it's only $99, whatever. But for people in the developing world, for example, that's a significant amount of money still. So, you know,
the only thing I can think of is that it's a filter, and that there is some cost of servicing accredited developers in terms of the support through customer service, and they want some kind of basic filter on that. That's the only thing I can think of, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a lot cheaper now than it was.
Apple's ability to completely ignore everything in their own forums, I can't imagine they're any better with developers. So maybe there is no cost.
Yeah. They've got 200 billion in the bank, so, you know, what do they care?
Yeah, I wonder at some point, and I'm an Apple fanboy for a long time, I wonder when they're going to trip over on that.
Yeah.
You know, they're now the dominant beast in the room.
To an extent, I mean, Android are the dominant one in terms of market penetration.
Yeah,
for
whatever.
Smartphones.
And here's an interesting example: the HealthKit story. If you look at the leadership chart and photographs for Apple, unless it's changed since the last time I looked, bunch of middle-aged, very wealthy white males. So they missed this.
Yes, no. The one of the notable exceptions being Lisa Jackson, who is their head of sustainability, and that's an interesting story, because Apple were, and I coined this verb, Apple were Greenpeaced. You know, Greenpeace took them to task for their lack of transparency around their supply chain and their lack of transparency around emissions back around 2011. And it was just after Tim Cook took over. And he was obviously deeply embarrassed by this on Apple's behalf. So he got in contact with the EPA and got in contact with the then head of the EPA, who was appointed by Barack Obama, one Lisa Jackson. And as head of the EPA, she was in an unenviable situation in that she was a political figure who was trying to do her job as head of the EPA and was being constantly rebuked by the Republican Party in the US. And then she gets a phone call from Tim Cook saying, listen, I'd like to have lunch with you and discuss a couple of things about Apple. So she has lunch with Tim Cook, where he offers her a job where she can be head of sustainability for one of the most successful companies on the planet. She has carte blanche to do anything she wants, and she reports directly to him, probably at a significant pay raise.
I can imagine.
So she jumps at the opportunity, obviously, leaves the EPA, joins Apple, and starts turning Apple into a sustainability powerhouse where they are now, all of their buildings, all of their data centers are 100% renewably powered. They were the first company to do a fully 100% renewably powered data center with their one in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's
And
fascinating, isn't
that,
it?
yeah, and now they've announced two new ones in Europe, one in Denmark and one in Galway, in Athenry. And they've also announced in North Carolina that they've bought a large forest so that they can make sure that all of their packaging is made from 100% sustainably farmed forest land. And they've brought in a sustainable forestry company to help them to do that.
They
You know, it's
could have bought Nokia and used the tail end of their login expertise.
I'd forgotten Nokia were a logging company back in the day. That's very true.
Back in Mike Cymru days, we were watching the emergence of Nokia as a technology business and taking comfort breaks in bathrooms with Nokia loo roll.
Serious.
So you had that dual identity, just the very tail end of it. Yeah, and I must correct myself. There are 16 people on the Apple leadership page, of whom 13 are male Caucasian-ish, and 3 are ladies, and there is 1 non-Caucasian-ish.
Yeah, there was for the first time at their developer conference, they had a couple of women speakers as well, and Tim Cook made a point about that before it happened, that it was going to happen. So
yeah,
I mean, I don't want to say it's a sop, it's an improvement, but there's still a long way to go on that front.
There's massively long way to go. Anyway.
Yeah. We'll push on. I'm going to skip a couple of stories and go into the Ariba one, because I think that's interesting. We've talked enough about Apple at this point, and the other stories were Apple based, so they got enough press during the week. They don't need any help from us.
Absolutely not.
The Ariba one is an interesting one. I was at Ariba Live this week in Munich. And basically, Ariba, for anyone who's not familiar, Ariba are a bit like Amazon, but for companies, not for individuals. So when companies want to buy or sell stuff, they can do it using Ariba. So basically, if I am building a new office, for example, or I'm trying to resupply my office, I can go out to the Ariba network and put out a request for quote. I want 500 new chairs, or I want 10,000 pages for my photocopier, or I want new whatever. You put out the request for quote on the Ariba network, and then you are listed there as a buyer, and all the sellers go along and they put in bids for your request for quote, and you choose the best one from amongst the bids that come in. So that all sounds nice, and it's very much a network effect based organization. If you don't have a decent network, then it's useless for you. But Ariba are the largest network of purchasers and suppliers on the planet. Their their annual turnover dwarfs Amazon's by orders of magnitude, literally. They have 1.7 million organizations using Ariba. So it's huge. And they announced a pilot program with an organization called Made in a Free World. And basically what it is if you are on the Ariba network, you can join the pilot program just by clicking the button here. And what they do then, once you join, is if you go to buy something, they will look through the supply chain of the sellers and tell you whether or not the sellers have slavery within their supply chain. They don't do anything. They don't tell you, no, you can't buy from them. All they do is they give you the information so that you can then make an informed decision. Do you want to buy from people who have slavery within the supply chain or not? Choice is up to you. They give you the information on the screen there. They give you risk factors associated with this particular buyer. And the risk factor can be, yes, there's a high chance that there's slavery within their supply chain, or no, there's not. So it's a lovely idea because, and in that post there, and you can go ahead and read that post after the show. In that post, they talk about the fact that there are about 13 million people in slavery globally today. And, you know, it can be forced labor, you know, the kind of stuff we're seeing in Dubai right now for building out the FIFA
Stadia. Is it Stadia?
Thank you.
Yes.
It is. I'm going to say it is anyway. And you know, it can be the clothing that you see being built, or sorry, being manufactured in places like Bangladesh and places like that. So, you know, there's very little information available from that, and this organization, Made in a Free World, is one of these organizations which goes out and collects that information, and now they're making it available on the Ariba network. So it's a really cool use of the Ariba network to disseminate information on supply chain and allow people to make more ethical purchasing decisions. And when I was at Ariba this week at their event, I brought up the idea with them that they make carbon information available as well to purchasers on the Ariba network. And they got very excited at the idea. So yeah. This is something that is for further discussion, but I'm quite hopeful that something will come of it, and that I'll be having more discussions with Ariba in the coming weeks and months, and that by Ariba Live is the name of the event, by Ariba Live 2016, we'll have something to announce on the carbon front. So fingers crossed on that something decent will come out of that.
I think this is fabulous. We had a discussion before we came on air, and I hadn't been aware of this network. I'm really interested in the idea of a pure commercial business starting to bring in layers of complication like this. Some people see them as complication. I see obviously, for me personally, it's a and for you it's a much better version of business. But fascinating that once they've done this, they've opened the door to multiple layers of third-party data and information being made available within their ecosystem.
Correct.
And from that point forward, it's going to be really difficult for them to refuse valid sources of data, especially if a number of their members look for it.
Indeed, and in fact, they have another couple of filters already. So if you are a buyer on the Ariba network, you can choose to preferentially choose businesses that are owned by minority groups.
Okay.
Or you can choose to preferentially see businesses that are owned by vets, not veterinary surgeons, but but U.S. war veterans, army veterans, whatever. So, you know, they have a number of those already built in. So now the slavery one, those ones are tick boxes that preferentially show these up. This one is different. It's a risk factor. Yeah, it's a risk factor shown at the top. And the carbon one, we'll see if it happens, and if it does happen, we'll see how it's shown up. I guess the chances are it would be around carbon intensity, not absolute carbon footprint, because you know, different manufacturers, depending on their size, are going to have different carbon footprints. That doesn't necessarily mean that their carbon intensity is better or worse. And the carbon intensity is the metric which is going to be more important rather than the overall carbon footprint.
Yeah, and for me, I suppose thinking about the purchasing decision, because we would work a lot with clients, helping them to decide both on human suppliers, where there's going to be a lot of interaction with people doing things for them, and also services. It can be a complex enough process, as you well know, both in your current and former roles. It can be a complex enough process to make what appears to be the correct commercial decision across bringing into account a number of different points of view and requirements and compromises. And then to layer on top of that what potentially is a non-commercial decision or criteria could really gum up the works.
Yeah, no,
As in,
absolutely.
how the hell do you make that decision? And I'm kind of was making notes as you were talking, and the key place where I can see this, I guess, being enforced in there is either there's an absolute around the founders of a business having very strong ideas on this, and this enables them to action them, or there's a marketing PR department who are watching the potential downside to being associated with something like a slavery campaign or an anti-slavery campaign.
Yeah,
And wanting
a lot
to
of this
avoid.
is for the slavery one. A lot of that is risk mitigation is a huge part
Yeah,
of it. But the other side of it is, for the likes of you and I and Joe Public, I mean, if you're given a choice of, similar pricing, one includes a risk of slavery and one doesn't. I mean, what are you going to choose? It's
yeah,
it's
that's easy for me or you. But when you have purchasing decisions being made by committees of people, bloody hell, can you imagine bringing this into it?
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, I think, it's a great idea.
I had an interesting discussion with the sustainability people in Dell yesterday, and we were talking about this very thing actually, and the carbon footprint implications. And the guy in Dell was saying that, from their perspective, this would be fantastic. But they would like it to be far more granular, such that you have the full lifetime carbon implications on a product by product basis, such that, if you are putting out a request for a desktop PC or a laptop, that, they would be able to give the full lifetime, the full life cycle implications of buying one of their devices, whereas other manufacturers can't do that. Well, Apple does that as well.
Apple, yeah.
But Apple and Dell are the two ones that they give you the full life cycle implications. So the thing is, in those cases, you can kind of compare apples with apples. With most other manufacturers, you don't have that information, so it's hard to make a comparison. So how do you rank them in a situation where in some cases you have the information and others you have no information at all?
Yes.
It gets tricky. It gets tricky. Okay,
but you know what? It's baby steps again, isn't it? This is all
yeah.
slow. This is all slow improvements.
I think what you do is you give the companies that give the information first.
Yeah.
That give the information, then you can make informed choices. And if you don't want to make an informed choice, well, that's your choice too.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll move on. So Intel have pledged $125 million for startups that back women and minorities. So that's pretty awesome news there. And I'm going to rip through a couple of these stories because we're coming towards the end, and we've gone over time. I thought this story out of Twitter was pretty cool as well. Twitter are allowing people to share block lists to help you make Twitter safer. So, for example, if you open up Twitter, open up your account, you can see which accounts you have blocked. And I've blocked a huge number of accounts over the years, and it's all spam accounts that I've blocked. There's only been one or two occasions where I've blocked people who have driven me over the edge of my patience, and I'm typically quite almost all of the accounts that I've blocked on Twitter are spam accounts. So that's potentially useful information that I could, just share that list of blocked accounts, and then people import that and they get less spam as a consequence. But that's not really who Twitter are aiming at with this. I think who Twitter are aiming at with this is people who have serious problems with Twitter being harassed. And we've seen
that was coming to my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen a couple of instances of this where, there was the Gamergate situation 6 or 8 months back, where people were getting atrocious amounts of abuse. And I'm seeing a little bit of that as well, because we held an event a couple of years back in the UK, Monkey Gra. We hold it every year. And one particular year, we had a woman speaker, who gave a very good talk, but she's seen as controversial. Her name is Shanley Kane, and she's seen as controversial, and as a consequence, we record all the videos in our events, and we put them up online afterwards. And her talk, at least 2 or 3 times a week, gets an extremely abusive comment on the YouTube video. And it's on my YouTube account, so I get notified straight away. I've left a comment on the video now saying abusive or personal comments about the speaker will be deleted. And as soon as I put that in, someone put a comment afterwards saying, "Tom, you must be a very busy man." And it's a minor irritation for me. Every so often I get 2 or 3 times a week I get an email from YouTube saying another comment has been left on this thing, and I go in, and of course again it's a typically nasty comment about her, unrelated entirely to what you said in the talk, which was a very good talk. And her talk was about product management. It wasn't even anything to do with anything controversial. It was it just, so for people who are living this day in and day out, for women who and why? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, I'm genuinely bamboozled by why people get upset because women want to have an equal voice. It blows my mind. The atrocious and abusive and vile comments they receive as a result of coming out and saying, we like to be treated equally. Yeah. So sorry, got off on a bit of a hobby horse there, but Twitter is helping to make this easier to get over, killing all the trolls, not literally killing them obviously, but blocking them so that they can't make people's lives more difficult. And thanks Twitter.
And I can imagine that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people will actually take the time to build those lists and share them out, so that process of blocking becomes really efficient.
Yeah, and I can see public lists being made available. Yeah. And Susan Keohane, who's one of the people watching here, said that Twitter's new mass blocking feature, horrible trolls apparently went after Kurt Schilling's daughter, she's saying, and she's a link to an article in Huffington Post. I have no idea what that's about. I'm not familiar with Kurt Schilling or his daughter, but that's a link I'll go to afterwards. But it's this has been.
He's a Red Sox pitcher, so yes.
Okay, I love the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually think I saw that story. That sounds
starting to sound familiar.
About that, I did.
Yeah.
And he wrote an article, and he went after some of the people who went after her. Yes, I remember it now. Yeah. Bizarre. It's just
and I've started to run into some of that in the last 6 months as I've been watching some of the stories coming out of the US around police brutality and execution of their citizens. Some of the commentary on those is horrendous.
Yeah, it's nasty. It kind of makes you despair for our gender, doesn't it?
It appears to be predominantly male, although isn't in that particular instance isn't necessarily an honesty. That whole kind of right wing, as a generalization, that right wing Republican point of view spreads comfortably across genders. So it's very equal opportunities.
Bizarre. Anyway, we'll move on. Two last things I want to hit on.
Go on then.
One because it is related, because it is another Twitter story. I'm not sure how big a deal it is, but Twitter have decided to remove the 140 character limit from direct messages.
I can see completely. That. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that being useful. I like yeah, it speaks to the upsurge in messaging applications, I guess, and
Yeah,
Twitter
they're
feeling the heat.
finally paying attention to the fact that they're losing
Exactly.
big chunks of attention, aren't they?
Exactly. And the other one related to that as well is that, and this is the last story, Facebook Messenger on Android alone has hit 1 billion downloads now. And they've got something like, at the start of the year, they announced 600 million active users on Messenger. And recently, in the last few days, they announced that's over 700 million active users on Messenger now. So, Facebook Messenger, having been strung out as its own app, got a lot of took a lot of flack at the time
Yeah.
for spinning out as its own app, but it seems to have worked very well for Facebook and for Messenger. And further down in this article, they talk about some of the things that they've recently announced for Messenger. So they've got PayPal's former president, David Marcus, in command, and their product guy as his first mate. And as a result, they've put in revamped location, free VoIP video calling. They've launched a standalone messaging website. They've opened a third-party app platform for Messenger. They've announced customer support chat with businesses, and they've announced friend-to-friend payments, all on the messaging app. So Facebook see messaging as a big deal. The reason I think it's important and interesting is they've now had 1 billion downloads on the Android Play Store alone. They're at 700 million active users globally. This is a free way for people to communicate, and it's not just communication. They're putting payments in there as well. They're putting customer support for businesses in there as well, and like I say, it's free. So for people in developing countries, this is a phenomenal way for them to have, once they've got a smartphone, it's a phenomenal way for them to have free communication just once they've paid for the data, and the data costs are low. Yeah. We've seen that they've got a Facebook Lite application as well, but low. I mean, the Messenger is low cost anyway in terms of data. It's primarily it's just text based, so it's extremely light in terms of its data costs. So this is going to have, this is going to be huge. Between this and WhatsApp, both of which are owned by Facebook, we're going to see messaging, particularly in developing countries, explode. And it's already exploding, but in the next 2 to 3 years, because right now, the Mary Meeker report on internet trends came out a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about there being about 3 billion people online now, but we're going to see another 2 billion people come online in the next 5 years. So,
majority on mobile.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We've had 20 years of internet access, a little over, and we've got to 3 billion people. In the next 5 years, we're going to get another 2 billion people again. So we're almost doubling the number of people who are on the internet, and that's going to happen in the next 5 years. That's got huge implications because these are people who are going to come online, and they're going to be buying, they're going to be communicating, they're going to be developing, they're going to be creating applications, they're going to be adding to our knowledge, they're going to be talking to each other, they're going to be creating new economies for themselves. They're going to be learning. They're going to be, because there are so many educational systems online now with MOOCs, they're going to be getting health advice. The implications for them and for what they can do as a consequence of having all these things online and extremely low cost are enormous. And even the smartphones. Microsoft have announced new smartphones using the Nokia brand. And Nokia have announced new smartphones, which are smart and extremely cheap, something like $20 for a smartphone at the low end.
Wow.
So, we're talking enormous democratization of information. It's, wow, it's enormous, it's fantastic. Uh-oh, the doorbell just went.
That's a fucking cue, Tom.
Sorry about that. Ready? Come over here. Come over here. Okay. That's my good guard dog. Say hi
And just to
everyone
add to
there,
that, because your overview was really, really interesting. We're sitting here on, both of us on Apple devices, using a Google platform to hold this live Hangout, and both of those companies are excluded from this messaging race completely, or pretty much completely.
Well, yes, they are. I mean, Google lost the chance to buy WhatsApp. They blew that, and they've messed up their Hangout chat app. I mean, it's okay, but you know, nobody I know uses it full time or uses it exclusively. I know one or two people who use it from time to time, but
it's all edge case stuff. Yeah,
they're very much in the minority. And iMessage is the Apple one that you talk about, and that's again, I mean, if you're on an iDevice, sure, you'll use it sometimes to talk to other people who are on iDevices, but you're better off using WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger because you're far more likely to be able to communicate with people. You know,
it just works.
Exactly. It's insane. It's silly. It's silly. Apple should open up iMessage. It's a very good application, but there's not enough people on it.
No.
And you can't be sure someone's going to be on it, so you just go on WhatsApp or Facebook instead.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
It's silly. It's silly. All right. We've gone well over time, as we're wont to do on this show. So I can't blame you, Keith, because we do it every week. We do it every week. When Chris is on the show as co-host, we do it then. It must be me. It must be me.
You are the common factor here.
I think so. I typically try and blame the co-hosts, but no, it must be me. It must be me. Okay. Anyway, listen, Keith, thanks a million for coming on the show, and thanks everyone for watching, for your interest. And we'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We'll see you all then.